Hello, and welcome to the Way to Live Well podcast. My name is Anna Maria, and I'm your host. We're going to have a slightly different format this week, as I'll be personally delving into the topic of Polyvagal Theory. Mind you, this is going to be a bit of a simplified variation of this topic, as it is massive and nuanced and very complex. So primarily my interest lies in its application within the yoga practice, specifically within groups who are looking for a more trauma-sensitive based practice. And I'll be discussing with you as well some of the really empowering tools that yoga has to offer us when paired with this knowledge that we get from the polyvagal system, how we can really start to harmonize our relationship with our nervous system. So to begin, I'll tell you a little bit about how I became interested in the topic of polyvagal theory. It all started a while back. A book was recommended to me by the name of The Body Keeps the Score. And the author is Besel Van der Kolk. He is a researcher and doctor of psychiatry. He has pretty much spent his life translating findings in neuroscience and attachment research and making these into treatments for traumatic stress and developmental trauma in children and adults. And from there, I just began to find numerous people who were doing really incredible work in the areas of healing from trauma, including Peter Levine, who really developed the somatic experiencing approach, and one of his books is called Waking the Tiger, if you're interested to pick that up. And then once you kind of dive into that space, you encounter so many amazing teachers and researchers, psychiatrists, psychologists who are working in this field, and amongst them was the very interesting polyvagal theory, which was developed by Stephen Porges, who is a psychiatrist and neuroscientist. In 1994, he proposed the polyvagal theory. His interest lies in particular in cranial nerves in relation to both animals and humans. Polyvagal theory essentially describes how our nervous system has evolved to keep us safe and alive. So poly meaning many, and vagus meaning coming from vagrant or wandering. The vagus nerve is very aptly named, as most anatomical descriptions, they help us to understand a little bit about what they are naming. So this is the 12th cranial nerve, and it travels essentially from the brainstem to part of the colon, making it the longest cranial nerve. It has two sections, or it splits off into two, and its primary function is in conveying sensory information about the state of the body's organs to the central nervous system. So this is really interesting to us because that means the vagus nerve is essentially relaying information back to the brain, and also a little bit of delivering messages from the brain to the body. So we know that we have both motor neurons and sensory neurons in the body, and the vagus nerve contains 80% of the sensory or afferent nerves, as they're called, and 20% motor neurons or efferent. So let's backtrack just a little bit and talk about the nervous system. There are two parts of the nervous system. They can be broken down into the peripheral and the central nervous system. The central nervous system consists of your brain and the spinal cord, and the peripheral nervous system is made up of your nerves, and they connect you to the rest of your body. Fascia also plays an interesting role here in communicating messages through electrical impulses in the body, which works actually faster than your nerves transfer messages. But that's just a little bit of a side note. So as you can imagine, when we're talking about the vagus nerve, we're talking about the peripheral nervous system. Most of our cranial nerves only go as far as the head and the neck, but the vagus nerve, as we now know, goes further. So head, neck, torso, lungs, heart, even into the digestive system. So when we talk about the peripheral nervous system, we also have two different parts of the peripheral nervous system: the autonomic, which always reminds me of automatic. So you can think about all the processes that happen automatically, such as heart rate, blood pressure, digestion, and breathing. Breathing is an interesting one, and we're going to touch on that again a bit later as well. And the somatic nervous system is more in control of voluntary movements, such as muscle movements, for example, Okay, so we're going to break this down a little bit further again and look at the autonomic nervous system, which can be broken down into two parts, the parasympathetic and the sympathetic nervous systems. These are responsible for, well, you can think about it in terms of parasympathetic for rest and digest and sympathetic for fight or flight. But in actuality, we kind of know that there's a bit more to it now. A really good way I heard this described is to think about parasympathetic and sympathetic as being coins, and they have two sides, right? So on one side, the sympathetic has states of excitement and joy and moving you forward and ambition. And on the flip side of that, there's obviously stress and fight or flight. Whereas with the parasympathetic, the two sides equate to states of rest and digest, where everything is more or less functioning quite in balance. And on the flip side of that, you go into a state of freeze or collapse or immobilization. In a healthy, regulated system, the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous systems work in balance. They balance each other out. They produce a kind of rhythmic flow which can move from rest to activity easily. So you can experience this now in your own body by thinking about two important physiological processes: the heartbeat, or the space between the heartbeats, and the inhalation and the exhalation. So if you think about when the heartbeat quickens, this is when the sympathetic nervous system is dominant. And when it slows, this is when the parasympathetic nervous system is dominant. This is called HRV, or heart rate variability. HRV is just a measure of the variation in time between each heartbeat. A lot of Stephen Porges' early work was around heart rate variability and the rhythm of our heartbeats, and how the vagal tone influenced heart function or cardiac function. He began to understand HRV as being a measure of autonomic health, influencing heart rate, blood pressure, breathing, and digestion. Something I love sharing in my classes is that in a healthy breathing pattern, the sympathetic nervous system is most activated at the top of the inhale and the parasympathetic nervous system at the bottom of the exhale. The pause in between breaths can be considered to be more on the parasympathetic side as well. So in a sense, we have the ability to experience the whole range of our autonomic activity through one full breath cycle. This also means that it gives us as individuals some power over influencing the subconscious processes that occur within our body. This is really interesting when it comes to practice as well. So it means we have the ability to tap into our nervous system. We are able to both enliven the body and energize through our breath, and also to take the body into deep states of relaxation. So if you think about perhaps the last time you were at a class and the teacher invited you to extend your exhale, for example, what did you notice? What did you feel in your body? And, there might not even be any long discussions around what is happening, but you feel it in your body. And this is really cool. So you may have noticed that I mentioned this is in a healthy breathing pattern. But what happens when the breath becomes dysregulated, or we feel disconnected from the breath due to current circumstances or trauma history? It may be that simply the practice of noticing the breath, of dropping yourself into felt sensation, seeing what is present for you in this moment, that might be the most useful practice. Polyvagal theory is helpful in giving us a more nuanced understanding of how we respond to stress. So the old model of stress explains that stress is what happens when we feel under pressure or threatened. So we go into that sympathetic activation, and we know actually that a certain amount of stress is good. We need that stress to propel us into action and to attend to whatever the issue is or the threat, and then we resolve it and we can come back to a parasympathetic state. So that's the older model. We also know that prolonged periods of stress are what really causes problems in the long term. So our emotions are a response to a stimulus, either internally or externally. And this response can happen even outside of our own awareness, especially if we're not in touch with our inner emotional life. And this is something that can be practiced, and yoga has certainly been an enormous help for me on my journey towards understanding and having an awareness of my own inner life. So I'm going to tell you a little story. This story is going to help us to kind of understand a little bit of the three main states of our nervous system as explained in Polyvagal Theory. So if we think about a rabbit or a group of rabbits grazing happily in a little field, and suddenly one catches a whiff of danger on the wind. They start to sense perhaps that a predator is nearby, and there's a wolf nearby sort of watching intently this little group of rabbits trying to pinpoint which one it's going to make its mark and chase after. The rabbit realizes that it has been singled out and it makes a dash. So this is sympathetic activation. So the rabbit is caught. The wolf's jaws around his neck, and the rabbit goes limp, almost seeming dead. So this is a parasympathetic response. The wolf carries the rabbit back to her den, to her cubs. And then when her attention is no longer on the rabbit seizes his chance for escape, suddenly coming back into life. Sympathetic response. When the rabbit was caught with fangs around his neck, his shutdown response kicked in, so he froze, coming into this kind of limp, almost dead state, immobilization. And then when he saw the opportunity to run, his fight or flight, sympathetic, kicked back in and he ran. So this story is a really great way for us to highlight the three different nervous system responses according to Stephen Porges. So firstly, we have the social engagement system, or the ventral vagal system. So when we're emotionally healthy and feeling calm and at ease with the people around us, generally around people we trust and we feel comfortable with, we're easily able to drink and eat and enjoy ourselves. We feel connected to the world and to ourselves. This is called the ventral vagal response because of the part of the brain that lights up when we are in this state of connection and presence in the world. And then we have the sympathetic activation, or freeze, flight, fight. Yeah, this is our immediate response to stress. It affects nearly every organ in the body. And so if we think back to the rabbit, this is our response to just keeping us alive. So when the rabbit sensed a threat, it sort of perked its ears up and started to scan for danger. And then when it realized it had been targeted, cortisol, adrenaline, and noradrenaline helped it to get away from the threat or to fight or the enemy, the wolf. So you can think about in yourself when this happens, when you feel that kind of intense stress, your heartbeat increases, you may begin to sweat and mobilize into action. So even our facial features will kind of change towards expressions of fear or perhaps anger. Your digestion will slow down as blood flows to the muscles. So what's happening is the blood vessels constrict to the intestines and then dilate towards the muscles, so giving us that ability to run or fight. And these feelings can be tense or electric, tight, vibrating, trembling, hot. Your hands may become clammy, stomach knotted, and as all your senses sort of focus on what is in front of you and how to get away. And then we have the dorsal vagal, which is considered to be the oldest part of our nervous system response. So this aspect, it's primal almost. Its function is to basically keep us frozen as an adaptive mechanism to help us survive, to either fight or flight again. So how do we live to fight another day, so to speak? So when our sympathetic nervous system has kicked into overdrive and we still can't escape, so we feel that impending death, the dorsal vagal parasympathetic nervous system takes control. So emotionally, it might feel like disassociation, numbness, dizzy, hopelessness, even shame, a sense of feeling trapped out of our body and disconnected from the world entirely. Maybe even feeling low or no pain as the lungs start to slow down, so the bronchi constrict and you might breathe slower. We may even have difficulty getting words out or feel restricted around the throat, And our brain has decreased metabolism, and this causes the body to lose awareness, become limp or almost dead, if you can recall back to the rabbit. So it was playing dead essentially, so immobility. So our nervous system response is similar to that of any other animal. We do the same thing as the rabbit. When we sense emotional or physical danger, we move from peaceful states of eating and drinking and chatting into fight, flight, or shutdown. And this is based on our perception. So whether there's a actual threat or a perceived threat. And I'll never forget, there was this one day, and I think this story kind of really highlights this for us. I was working in TK Maxx back when I was training to be a massage therapist, trying to pay the bills, working at night. And this woman came to the counter, and I think we were celebrating something in the shop at the time, or maybe a child had some balloons. I can't really remember the details of that, but a balloon burst behind this woman, and her body perceived this as a threat, and she instantly began to almost like drop back into her body, and I could see the look in her face. It was like she had receded so far back inside herself that she could not be reached, and she almost tried to reach out for help, and I automatically wanted to reach out and help her, and I was so struck by this response that she had. And at the time I didn't fully understand, but now I understand that for whatever reason, even though the incident was not an intentional threat upon her, her body shifted into shutdown mode. She registered it as some kind of trauma, and her body just went into complete shutdown. We were able to attend to this woman and sit her onto a seat and be with her and just be present with her as we waited for an ambulance to arrive. And you could still see that she was quite disorientated, disassociated from the entire experience. She was kind of non-verbal. The ambulance crew arrived shortly after and were able to support her more fully. In some cases, of course, the trauma event really is life-threatening, and our nervous system responds appropriately to the threat. No matter what the case, your brain believes that what is happening is life-threatening enough. It causes the body to go into fight or flight or shutdown. And if someone has been through really traumatic events that their body tips into shutdown response, any event that reminds the person of that life-threatening occurrence can trigger them into disconnection or disassociation again. This is why yoga is such an empowering practice. It offers us so many tools so that we can help to really be with our emotions, to understand our nervous system from a very embodied place, from a somatic place, through the shapes and movements that we make and the breathing practices and compassion and relaxation-based practices. We're able to form a more harmonious relationship with the different parts of our nervous system. This allows us to be alert, aware, and relaxed at the same time. Hopefully eventually moving more fluidly between instinct, emotion, and rational thought. And these are practices that can take time. That's why it is a practice. Practicing things such as assertiveness. So emotional shutdown occurs when we feel that we cannot communicate with other people, or when we feel a sense of being trapped. Our nervous system perceives that threat. So we can create safety through choice, through autonomy, and through creating a practice that is rooted in choice. So this choice becomes empowering, and the yoga shapes create a sense of secure home base for gentle exploration and curiosity. So we begin to explore sort of moment by moment experiences within the breath, the movement, sensations, emotions, and voice. So another way that yoga can really benefit us is through strengthening our body, through doing something kind of hard or challenging on an ongoing basis. This allows us to build a kind of internal strength as well. And it gives us a sense of being better able to protect yourself. And this can be really powerful in resetting the nervous system over time. And so that, we can be in states of fight or flight for a bit longer, so that we can start to observe those sensations again before going into complete shutdown or disassociation. So I'd like to invite you into a little practice now. So if it feels safe for you to do so, and if you'd like to try this now or save it for later, you are more than welcome. Know that all of you is welcome. Sitting comfortably perhaps, or standing, whatever feels right. Just begin to bring your attention to the area of your eyes and see what you notice here. Is there any tension or fatigue, or is there a sense of relaxation around the muscles of the eye? Notice what the muscles and the face are like around here. So around the eyebrows, the space between the eyes, and the little muscles at the corners of the eyes. Maybe invite a little bit of movement into your eyes. So you could either widen your eyes, or you could try squeezing them shut. You could look from one side to the other, or up and down. And then just begin to explore what it might feel like to soften around the eyes. Almost taking your gaze into a gentle expression of warmth. If you like, you could think about someone that you care about and imagine sharing with them a loving smile. Notice how the changes in how you express yourself through your eyes resonates in other areas of your body. Notice your breath here. Notice your shoulders. Notice the front of your body. Just noticing. So yoga is the practice of self-study. It helps us to refine and develop our sense of awareness and sensitivity to our internal space. Over the past 2.5 years, I've been working closely with Natalie Bodart, a clinical psychologist of the Bodart practice, to develop a program of yoga that both incorporates trauma-informed practices and the ideas and theories from Polyvagal Theory to create a practice that is geared towards supporting each individual on their journey towards wholeness. If you'd like to learn more about this program, you can head on over to the Bodart Practice website to find out a little bit more information. If you enjoyed this podcast episode, I'd love to hear from you. If you have any questions, I would also love to know. It's really awesome to connect. So yeah, please share any thoughts with me. Also, I will post references to the people I mentioned within the podcast, as well as my teacher, Arielle Swhwartz, who specifically works in the Polyvagal Theory applied to yoga field. She's really an amazing teacher, and I've learned so much from her. And so hopefully I can get her on the podcast one of these days to chat to you more in depth about this amazing topic. Until then, I wish you a very lovely day. Thank you so much for listening, and be well.